All right. So today's class is going to be basically about, it's going to be focused on building the garden. Um, like how, like, starting from scratch, what are the basic requirements that we need? Like how to like make sure you have decent soil. How do you like, how to what kind of garden, raised beds, in the ground, things like that. So we're going to talk about a lot of different, possibilities today. This is one of my favorite gardens that we did a little while ago. This is in Langdon Park. It's a Langdon Community Garden. The Chuck Brown Memorial is like a block that way. But it's we wanted to do a demonstration garden where we wanted to try out all different kinds of raised beds to see, which ones are doing better. So we have like cedar, we have pressure treated with like a barrier. So like we'll talk about the copper leaking out and stuff. We had like cement, metal, and that recycled plastic. So definitely, if you want to get some ideas, check it out. You just Langdon. It's in Langdon Park. The pool is right up here. But yeah, so we're gonna talk about garden requirements. We're gonna talk about soil preparation, how to get the soil ready. Talk about how to like build some bed creations, and we're gonna really like begin talking about garden design. We're gonna talk about more like the basics of garden design, and then we'll jump a little bit deeper in garden design later. Um, but yeah, I like to start off. I mean, everyone already gave some really amazing reasons why they garden, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that because it seems like you all kind of knew, but already. But I mean, I'm thinking about like, especially during this pandemic, we've seen an explosion of gardeners since this pandemic, and I think that I mean, it's pretty, at the same, it's pretty clear. I mean, at the same time, we were watching like all these farms across the country, these big mega farms, like, till in millions of pounds of produce because their whole supply system fell apart. And at the same time, we're watching like mile long lines to food banks and things like that. I think people are starting to realize that our food system has a lot of issues. And one of the ways, there's a lot of ways to approach the food system. Urban ag isn't like this, solution. It's like it's part of the solution, but it's part of like more growing local organic food is part of building a better food system, and for a lot of different reasons, whether it's like the taste alone. Um, like I remember I hated tomatoes and until I thought they all taste like plastic until I grew my own tomato, and it's like the most amazing. And I can't get enough like sun golds. If you ever have a kid that says it doesn't like vegetables, give them a sun gold tomato. It's like the most amazing, easy to grow plant. But like money too. Like if you've ever, like I know people talk about like someone was telling me the nickname for Whole Foods is whole paycheck because it's like it's crazy how expensive it is to eat food that isn't full of poisons and toxins. So yeah, definitely is a great way to save money. It's a great way to better health, like urban ag. I mean, I want to be careful. Like urban ag isn't like this going to cure hunger, but it's definitely going to be a supplement for providing people with more healthy organic grown food. So increasing food access, saving the planet. It's huge carbon footprint when like we're getting lettuces from California or a different country. Therapeutic, there's articles about where there's actually antidepressants in soil. So the more like I stopped wearing gloves when I read that, and I swear like the more yeah, like just digging in the dirt is such a therapeutic thing. Builds communities, a great way to learn, is if you do it right. I mean, it definitely can do the opposite if you don't do, which does happen, like but if you do it right, it can really build and strengthen communities, could create community shared resources, educating the youth, empowering. There's just a lot of great ways reasons why we want to garden. um, okay, so Danny, I'm posting the link to the PowerPoint for anyone that hasn't seen it yet. So if you want to download the PowerPoint, it's in the chat. Cool. So let's kind of dive in. So let's say, all right. So let's say I have, a backyard, or I have a plot, and what's like the first steps of kind of approaching this, and first things that we need to know, to actually turn that backyard, that grass area into a garden. So these are the most important things. The first three things are sunlight, drainage, and water. sunlight's the most important. If you don't have, enough sunlight, I mean, you could do mushrooms, for sure, but that's about it. But if you don't have at least 3 hours of solid sunlight in the day, you're not going to be growing a whole lot. But we kind of we break off it. Well, fortunately, like you don't, there's actually, especially in the summer, I mean, we can have up to like, 14 to 16 hours of sunlight, certain days, like at peak in the summer. So you don't need all that sunlight to grow. It's great. I mean, the more sunlight you have is great, but really, most plants are typically what we call full sun. Like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, they need at least 6 to 8 hours. So that's when you see the full sun, that's what we're talking about. And to kind of break it down a little bit, so that like think about the sun when it rises in the east, or yeah, right, it rises in the east, it travels the south sky and then sets in the west. I may have that backwards, but I think that's it. Really, if you want to get 6 to 8 hours of sunlight in the summer, you just need to have two of those three directions of sunlight. So let's say you have the sun in the morning, you have the sun in the south, but you have a giant tree in the west that blocks the sun. That's enough to have full sun. Or maybe you're behind a building, so you're not getting the south sun, but you're getting east and west. That could be enough to do enough sunlight. But then if you're only getting one of those directions, let's say you have a guard, you get your morning sun, but then you have a building in the south side and a tree on the west side, so you're only getting like 3 to 4 hours of sun. That's still doable. You have to look for partial shade plants or partial sun plants. So that's in between 3 to 6 hours. So like tomatoes and peppers are probably going to not survive or going to be really unhealthy. But other things like greens and herbs and like root vegetables and things like that do well in 3 to 6 hours. A lot of them will do better in full sun. And then certain things likes partial shade, when like if you're growing, um, we're going to talk more about this later, like when to grow what, but there's like cool weather crops like greens you grow in the spring, and that's when they're the most sweet and taste the best, but then they get better and a lot of times they die in the summer. But if you give it some shade in the summer, it balances it out a little bit better. So you can, we'll talk more ways of kind of manipulating that a little bit. But let's say you're only getting like morning sun and that's it. Well, you can definitely do these aren't the complete list. This is just kind of get you started, but like I said, greens and herbs and roots or crops are great. Legumes are what we call nitrogen fixers. So when we say nitrogen fixers, these are really important to have in your garden. Even if you don't like peas and beans, you should have a portion of your garden that's peas in the spring and beans in the summer, and maybe some peas in the fall, or just growing your beans out, because they're what we call nitrogen fixers. Legumes, so they actually pull nitrogen from the air and deposit it into the ground and actually fertilize your ground. Which we'll talk more about those plants later, but they do well in partial shade. And then different kinds of things like currants and gooseberries and strawberries and things, do well. So depending on what you're fond, but I mean, like if you have at least two directions or at least 6 hours of sunlight, you can grow just about anything. But like I said, if you just have a little bit of sunlight, and sometimes you could time it, like if you're worried about exact, you can actually like when the sun comes out, click a stopwatch and just check it every hour just to see how many hours you have. There's fancy meters that you can get to measure that, but you can just get a timer. Um, but then let's say like you have like 4 or 5 hours of sunlight and you want to just squeeze a little bit more because you really want to grow tomatoes. There's little tricks you can do, like plant your garden on a white wall, on the north side, so when the sun hits it, it bounces it back, because the leaves on your plants, they can absorb sunlight on the top and the bottom. So you can bounce it on both directions. You can even do like reflective mulch, where you get like aluminum foil or different plants, and it actually the sun, it bounces the sun back and forth, so you're actually hitting more of the plant. So it's the same amount of sun, but they're absorbing more of the chlorophyll. And that's one way where if you're close to full sun but you still want to do it, you can actually add. It may buy you an extra hour by doing some of these things, but if you only have like a couple hours of sun, it's not going to do it. And like I think I saw a study. One of the most reflective surfaces is mylar, and if you're ever looking for a free mylar, If you go to a race like a 5K or a marathon or whatever, if you go to the end point, whenever people finish, they give them free mylar blankets to keep them warm, and then 5 minutes later they throw them off, and it's always a giant pile of mylar, and no one minds to be. Or I've never had anyone mind that if you want to just grab a bunch of mylar. So sunlight is the most important part. You need to make sure you have a decent amount of sunlight. Um, and then the second most important part, in my opinion, is drainage. So if you have really bad drainage, you either need to do something about it, or you're just not going to. You need to find another spot, or you can do raised beds and things. We'll talk about different things to do for drainage. But one thing, if you're growing in the ground, if you're not doing a raised bed, you want to do a drainage test, and that's where you basically dig a foot hole, which most shovels are around a foot, so just the size of a shovel. You fill up once, and then kind of go away for a while, let it kind of it like primes the soil, and then you fill it up a second time. And then the idea is like you kind of measure it. You want it to kind of drain, a couple inches per hour at least. But basically, I would come back in like 2 hours, and if that water hasn't moved, like it's not a very good place to do a garden. So either find another one or do a raised bed. But drainage is definitely a big issue. We've been dealing with a lot of that with a lot of our farms. But there are things like, let's say you really want to do this in this backyard. There are ways to actually deal with that drainage. Double digging, which I'm going to show a video of double digging, just because it's so. For some reason, I have trouble explaining it. But it's basically just it's like tilling 2 feet down. It's this process is a great way to kind of really redo your whole area. Raised beds, you don't have to worry about drainage. Like that's a great thing about raised beds is like when it rains really hard, like all the in-ground gardens, a lot of times you'll see lots of flooding, but in raised beds, they actually thrive. As long as yeah, you have a good soil. Also, raised beds. You don't need unnecessarily have to have wood for raised beds. You can make your own raised beds, and that's a great way. We'll talk about more about that in a second about how to sculpt your bed so that can deal with drainage. French drains. We've been installing a lot of French drains lately. So if you have an area that floods really bad, you can actually these are pipes. A French drain is basically a pipe with a bunch of holes in it, and then they either like fill it up with gravel, or you can get this gravelless one that's full of like kind of fake gravel and a sock, and then you lay it in this trench, and you kind of direct the water that was like sitting there, because a lot of times it's flooding because the water has no place to go. So you can actually send it out to hopefully like a rain garden or a bioswale, or just some place that's better, that you would prefer to flood rather than your garden. So there's definitely some different options when you have some drainage issue. So Yolanda talks about soil. We'll talk about soil testing in a little bit. So definitely we'll cover that today. So this is actually what we did with Letter Gardens. These are photos from Letter Gardens. Letter Gardens is a 50-year-old farm that just in the last 10 years or so, it got all kinds of different issues with flooding. It just like the area got too compacted, and unfortunately, people couldn't really grow a lot, or like they would grow and then it would rain really hard, and everyone would lose everything. So we actually redid this whole site. We spent a lot of time and effort last year and got it to the point where it's not flooding anymore. And we installed a couple French drains because there's a great bioswale. But the main thing that we did is we built these raised beds. We'll actually have a chance to build some of these in one of our field days. But the idea, we built these beds that were basically flood proof. And so when it rains, it would flood a little bit, but it wouldn't affect our crops. And basically what we did was, this is a broadfork. I'm gonna show you a video of the broadfork. The broadfork is this awesome giant, like, giant pitchfork, and you use it because so they've been rototilling on this site for like 40 years or whatever, for a long time. And rototiller is great for like 6 inches. It's one of the, I'll show you a picture of rototiller. It's like one of those machines with it's like a tractor. It mixes up all the soil, but then it's great for like 4 to 6 inches, but then it compacts below that. And so they just had like this deadpan below, so where the water would just sit and just flood everything. So we use this broad fork of these like giant tines to kind of break break that up a little bit so there was like better drainage. And then we dug trenches. We actually went below the surface, about like 6 inches to a foot below, used that extra soil and put it on top of this bed, raising the bed up. So all of a sudden, like, the trenches are below the ground, and the bed is actually like, a foot and a half tall. And then we filled the trenches with wood chips. So when it would rain, um, the plants were high enough where the plants wouldn't, I mean, they would get water, but they wouldn't flood, and all the water would stay in the trenches, and then the wood chips would soak that up, so you can actually walk, so you're not like sinking in mud puddles and stuff. And that, along with a couple French drains, which you'll have a chance to see all this, and we'll get some hands-on bed building, but that in itself solve the flooding problems. So I definitely recommend. I'm a big fan of these types of beds. And we'll talk more about how to build beds later in this class. And so let's say you got plenty of sunlight and you have good drainage, or you're going to build a raised bed. So the next thing is water. Where are you going to get your water? And this is important because the very first farm that I started, Wangari Gardens by the Washington Hospital Center, like it was like maybe a dozen years ago. That was one of the hardest ones because there was no water access. There was nowhere to tap in. Like we'd have to pay $50,000 to like rip up a road and run a line. So, I mean, we tapped into a fire hydrant. You can get a special hydrant from DC Water. It's super expensive, and you have to pay monthly. You take it in to get read, and it's a big pain in the hassle. And then we ran this like a line across the road, which cars would just rip up the hose, and then we filled up a cistern once a week, and it was like a 6 or 8 hour ordeal. It was a nightmare. So if you don't have water, you're gonna burn out pretty quickly if you don't have easy access. You really want spigots, or if you have like a wall spigot, this is a water key. If you're in a building that's has a spigot outlet coming from the wall. That's ideally, if you don't have water access, you can call Miss Utility. It's like free service. It's actually by the law. If you're going to dig deeper than like a foot, you're supposed to call them, so you don't. They'll come out and spray paint the utility lines in your ground. Their purpose is they don't want you to hit a gas line or electric line, which most of those serious lines are buried deep. And then I've definitely hit like cable lines and stuff like that, and felt that was a big ordeal. So it's good to, before you dig, call the service. They'll come out and spray paint the area, so and if they spray paint blue, it's a blue line. And then you can actually, I mean, it maybe for about $1,000 or so, you can tap into that. You got to set up a new service, get a backflow preventer and stuff, but it's doable, like especially if you're doing a big farm project. It's definitely doable. And then like collecting water is great, but it's not very efficient. Like especially if you just have like a 50-gallon barrel. Unless you have unless you're like tapping into a school or some giant building, like you're not going to get enough water for the year. Especially like I see a lot of rain barrels attached to the tool sheds, which is like cool, like why not? But I mean, it takes a whole, like I know it usually takes like a whole year to rain to fill up one of these barrels from a small tool shed. So it's just capturing water is tough. I know we had this one farm, we eventually like dug a well for it, but we couldn't figure out how to get them water. And they had hoop houses, so we did gutters on the hoop houses and lots of different rain barrels, and that kind of worked. But the group eventually just burnt out. So the rainwater is really hard to do. And if you're having like, if you ever see like these asphalt shingles, like the really gritty ones, that's when it rains, it actually loosens up some material that's some of it's like heavy metals. So if you do have asphalt shingles, and you want to collect water, just install what's called a first flush system, where the water goes down first, and it goes down to here, and then all the heavy metal sits here, and then just pure water rises up and then goes into the cistern. So you definitely want to if you're collecting water from asphalt shingles, just be a little careful about that. And then I talked about fire hydrants as well. It's not ideal, but it's definitely doable. But if your water access sucks, I definitely would think about doing another site, because it can, especially after doing it for a couple of years, it can be you want to make these gardens as easy as possible. All right. So let's say you found a garden, or your backyard. It has enough sunlight. You have a water spigot. You have good drainage. So now let's talk about soil. So how are we going to what are you going to do with the soil that's already there? And the first thing you should do is a soil test, because I mean, things that you're looking for sure. I mean, like contaminants like lead and arsenic. All soil has a certain level of lead and arsenic, a natural level, but then you have additional like runoffs from roads to like different lead paint that's been chipping off to like a lot of times people will have a giant pile of coal in their backyard back in way back in the day, and that would have leachate to different things. And so you definitely want to do, test your soil. A lot of times it's backfill nasty soil, when they do like a house. But a lot of it is it's about your nutrients. Like you may have lots of nutrients in your soil, but really one of the most important parts of your soil is your pH, and your pH is a measure of your acidity versus alkaline. One being like super acidic, like acid, and then 14 being like super alkaline, like bleach. And like when it's too acidic or too alkaline, your nutrients don't get absorbed. Um, so you may have lots of nutrients, but if your soil is a little too acidic, your plants just can't take it up. I don't really, I can't explain the the whole process of that, but that's the case. So ideally, you want your garden to be between like 5 and like 7 or 7, and a half. And this is a very confusing scale, but the idea is like the more acidic your soil is, the harder it is for plants to absorb nitrogen and potassium and all that. But yeah, ignore how stupid and confusing this graph is, and just know that when you're looking for like 5, to be in this area, like 5.5 to like 7.5. If you're too high or too low, if it's barely too high, like if you got like 4.5, you can probably raise it up by adding certain amendments. But if you're like at 3 or 2, it's really hard to change the pH of your soil, particularly for the long term. You may add amendments, but they go away year to year. So if your pH is really off, I would recommend finding another site or doing raised beds. But also you can check, for macronutrients and micronutrients and organic matter and things like that. But yeah, how you do a soil test? So we do have these like fancy little soil probes, where you can stick in the ground and get a nice little cross section of soil. We have those in the tool share if you want to try. But really, I mean, all you need is like a shovel and a bucket and a tarp and a plastic bag and a Sharpie. You don't have to make this too complicated. So step by step doing a soil test. First of all, you need to identify what we call unique areas. So you have your backyard here, but then you have an area that it has like street runoff, or then you have an area over here that has like paint chipping and falling off, but then you have a nice vegetable place that used to be a vegetable garden. So each one of these is its own unique area. You don't want to like test all of this because it's just going to be like a mess, as one test, because it's going to be like crazy results. You just want to do one unique area, one test per unique area. And in each unique area, you want to do like 5 or 10 holes, depending on how big, it is. If it's a big area, maybe, do more. And the idea is you want to do like a foot hole using your shovel. So you dig a hole that's the size of your shovel. And then the idea is you want to have a little cross section of the soil. So you take that shovel and you just kind of, scrape an edge of that hole all the way down. And then you take that cross section and you pull out any rocks and grass, anything that's not soil. And then you throw that in the bucket. And then you do that like 5 or 10, holes all around your garden. And then you have it, throw it on your bucket, and then you mix that bucket up. It's nice. I have a tarp. You have a tarp, and you can like kind of dump it out and let it dry in the sun, and it's easier to mix. And plus, I mean, you're going to be shipping this, so why pay the extra money to ship a bunch of water in your soil? So it's nice you can dry out your soil a little bit. It's not going to mess the test up. And then mix it, put it back in the bucket, mix it up really well, and then you really just want like a little like a cup's worth. So you scoop out a cup and then you put it in the bag, label it, and let's see a question. Real quick, even with pure organic compost materials, you can't change soil pH. Um, So you can change pH mildly. We'll talk a little bit about that in another slide. There's certain amendments that you can use, even organic stuff like pine needles can change it. Compost can change it a little bit, but you're not going to change it more than like maybe like a half a point on at the most, you know, and that may take years for it to happen. But we'll definitely talk more about changing the pH soil. So okay, so you have this like soil that's in a little Ziploc bag. And now you know you write in the name of it, and then you go to, these are the 4 places I've used in the past. I'm sure there's more out there, you know, but these places, A&L Labs in Virginia, University of Amherst in Massachusetts. You know, I just recently did one with Delaware. They were fantastic. And UDC, like on again, off again, they have a soil testing lab. I know like the funding is kind of, they don't always have funding. Like when they first started out, they would like come to your site and do your soil test. It was so cool. But I know there's like some, I don't know exactly where they are. Franny, I don't know. Do you know where they're at right now? Like, are they accepting
Yeah,
soil?
absolutely. So the lab is can you hear me, Todd?
Yep. Yeah, I can
Yeah,
hear you.
yeah, so we kind of went down a little bit during COVID, but the lab is back open. So you can do your samples and get them over to the lab and they'll test them for you. Yep, they're back
Awesome.
open. Hmm.
Awesome. It's fee based, right? Like they're charging.
Yeah, it's a small fee. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
small fee. Yep, and they'll probably waive it too if you know let them know that
Yeah.
you may have some
Cool.
hardship and don't want to pay it or can't pay it. But yeah, award-winning lab, excellent. I recommend it.
Yeah, no, I've used, they're fantastic. And, yeah, I'm glad they're back open. So yeah, definitely check out each one. I mean, you can compare prices. I mean, most of it's pretty cheap. It's going to range anywhere from $10 to like $50, depending on like all the things, all the tests you're including. If you want to do heavy metals versus the different things, but you can shop around. But I mean, UDC, you can just like drop it off yourself. So I mean, so that's super nice. But and then if you want to get a little bit more crazier, or not crazier, more into like the biology of your soil, you know, because these are just going to test, you know, um, they'll test organic matter levels, but mainly they're just looking at the different nutrients and contaminants. But if you want to like understand like the biology and how, because that's really where it's at. If you want a healthy garden, you need really great biology, which we'll talk a lot more about that, especially during the compost class. But these 2 labs do biology test, microbiology testing. So if you want to see where you're at with that too. And then like you'll mail it to them, and then like a week later, they're usually pretty quick. They'll email you, and then usually it will mail you a hard copy of your results, and it's full of lots of crazy information. It looks really confusing, but it's actually pretty simple. You're looking for only a couple of things. Most of the stuff you can kind of you don't need to know, like nitrogen. Nitrogen's like such a fluid, you know, nutrient that if you're high or low can change day to day. But and then certain things, they usually give you recommendations, like if you're low on a certain potassium, they'll give you recommendations on things to pick up. A lot of times they lean towards the inorganic, more chemical fertilizers. You know, a lot of these test labs, because they're thinking more like farm based. But you can look up, you know, if you don't want to use that, you can look up the organic alternatives. But you're mainly, what you're looking for is pH first. You want to know, like, this is 5.6, so that falls in our range, 5.5 to 7 that we're looking for. So this is great pH. You know, I could look at, you know, there's like, you know, certain nutrient things that are well and not well, but that's all right. I mean, you can fix that pretty easy with adding compost and nutrients. I'm gonna look at the lead though, the lead and arsenic, and it's 47 ppm is parts per million. Um, and that's a natural occurring level. I think lead, anything below 300 is naturally occurring, and then like it's like 3 to 400 is like caution, and it's like 4 to 5 I think is like, you know, really beware. So this is perfect. It's a natural recurring, you know, lead. And sometimes people change, you do ppm, they also write milligrams over kilograms. So if you see either one of them, they're the same. So that's basically, yeah. I mean, I'm looking at organic matter. This is a greenhouse or hoop house. So there's a crazy amount of organic matter. Usually it's only like, you know, a couple percent, like 2 to 3%. But yeah, but what's great about most of this is the second page will usually be full of like actual, you know, recommendations. Like, oh, we noticed that this is low, this thing. So But like I said, the main thing you're looking for is the pH and the contaminants. Everything else you can deal with. You can add, nutrients and organic matter. But if these two are off, you should find another place or just do a raised bed. Cool. So let's say I did a soil test and everything's looking great. So now, usually you do a lot of this like during the off season, so now it's like, now I want to start prepping. Let's say my yard is basically grass. So I don't want to kill, one option is you can spend the whole day ripping up sod. Or if you have the time, you could do these really great techniques. This is only if you have a lot of extra time, like sheet mulching or lasagna. Like lasagna gardening, you need to start in like the fall, and then it's ready to be planted next spring. And then sheet mulching, you need to give yourself a couple of months. But the idea with sheet mulching, and they're both similar concepts. It starts out with cardboard on the bottom, and that's going to kill your grass. Not only kill your grass, but it's also going that dead grass is going to attract lots of great bugs like worms are going to come in, dig holes and burrows and grab. And worms are great. They don't actually want the grass. They grab the grass and they pull it along their holes and let fungus grow on it and then come back and eat that. So they're like spreading all this organic matter around and like doing some internally tilling. And then you add different layers of compost and mulch and different organic matter on top. And then the hope is like in a couple months when you're ready to dig and start tilling, you're not going to have to rip up sod. It's going to be much softer. It's still going to be a workout, but you can it's going to be way easier than and then just like ripping off a bunch of sod in your day. But that's only if you have time. I mean, if you're starting to garden this month, this is kind of too late for this stuff. But and then if you, like I say, if you have if you want to start something in the fall and have a whole, winter, so you could do lasagna gardening. And this idea is the same as sheet mulching, but you're trying to make a giant pile of just organic matter. You like pull a bunch of branches and leaves and wood chips and stuff and mix it, compost, different layers and grass. And the idea is you kind of build it several feet tall, and then it kind of slowly breaks down and by spring. And then you don't want to really, I mean, it could be great soil, but it's probably off on certain things. So then I would still recommend buying some bags of topsoil and compost and mixing it in to your pile as well, just to make sure everything's, somewhat balanced. Oh yeah, and make sure to water these, just to stimulate the biology to break things down. So those are kind of ways to prep the soil. Like I said, a lot of these things you don't have to do. These are just kind of recommendations if you don't if you got to rip up a bunch of sod and you don't want to kill yourself and you have the time. And then double digging. So double digging is something you only do your first year of your garden. You don't want to do this every year. One, it's like instant. It's a lot of work, and you just don't need to. It's just the idea is if you go to like a yard that has never been a garden, it's probably when they built the house, it's probably back landfill, compacted, nasty soil that's just like super compacted. So the idea is you're actually going to be tilling it 2 feet down is the idea, because most plants will be happy with a foot, to grow their roots, but you can give them 2 feet, they'll be super happy. So the idea is you start out, you dig a hole, you move the dirt over here, and then I take a pitchfork and just stab this and kind of break up the second foot. So that way we're down 2 feet. And then I dig move over here, dig another hole, move the soil back to the first hole, then dig it down here. And then move it back and dig it. So they keep on doing that. You can have like a piece of plywood if you don't want to, stand on your garden. You just keep on moving it over. And the idea is when you're done, there's like 2 feet of like really nice tilled area. And it's always confusing when I try to describe it. So I just embedded. I've been embedding a lot of videos lately because it's just nice to get a break from my scratchy, annoying voice. But it's just you can't. Yeah, we're going to be watching a lot of like short videos as well, just to kind of explain it a little bit better. But this is one about double digging. And if you can't hear it, let me know in the chat.
Hi, I'm Tricia, an organic gardener. Soil preparation is so important in organic gardening. And today I want to talk about double digging. This is a technique that was invented by French gardeners in the 19th century. The double digging technique involves loosening the soil to about double the depth of the head of a garden spade. Double digging for initial soil preparation really does a good job if your soil is compacted. But if your soil is nice and loose and loamy, you don't want to double dig because that will just disturb the earthworms. To double dig, you'll need a large tub or a wheelbarrow, a spade, and a digging fork or a broad fork. Fertilizers and compost can be added at this time too, especially fertilizers with phosphorus, which moves very slowly through the soil. Double digging is hard work, but it's really the best way to loosen your soil. And it doesn't create hardpan like rototilling can. And remember, you don't have to double dig your whole garden, just the planting area. Before you double dig, make sure your soil is dry enough. To check soil moisture, dig down 6 inches. Grab a handful of soil and squeeze it together. If the lump you make can be crumbled easily, the soil is dry enough to double dig. If you double dig while your soil is wet, you're going to do more harm than good, so just wait until it dries out. Mark out your bed with stakes and strings. That way you won't do more work than you need to. We're going to dig a trench. It's going to be the width of the bed, and it's going to be no smaller than the width of the broad fork. It's going to be 12 inches deep. Then we're going to put the dirt into the bucket. Okay, now for the easy part. We're going to grab the broad fork and we're going to loosen up the soil underneath the soil we just dug out. Oh, this soil is so nice and loose. Now's the time to add the fertilizer and now a little bit of compost. I'm going to dig the second trench. The topsoil that I dig up from the second trench is going to replace the topsoil from the first trench. Continue this pattern until you get to the last trench. When you're finished trenching, just add all the soil from the first trench into the last trench. So now just water your beds a little bit to let the dirt settle, and you're ready for your French intensive garden and to grow organic for life.
All right. And if you don't have a broad fork, you can use a pitchfork or yeah, anything that you can kind of stab in there. All right. So it was so ideal soil structure is a mixture of different things as well. We won't spend too much time talking about this, but ideal soils, you want to have a mixture of like sand and silt and clay, and then it just creates this perfect mixture. Unfortunately, most of our soil in DC is very clay. We're a very clay heavy soil, so we don't have as much silt and sand. So that's why we need to add, you can add sand and different amendments, but really just adding compost, is a great way to kind of like, if you need, like sand gives porosity, it allows like drainage, and then like clay also, has nutrients, but it doesn't have, the particles are, clay, the particles are really small and pushed together, as opposed to sand, the particles are really big with lots of, room. So adding compost, adding different amendments and things can actually like help that, which we'll talk more about amendments in a second. But okay, so we have this garden. We did a soil test. We did, everything's great. We have we ripped up the sod, the sod, or we sheet mulched it, double dip, got everything going. So now we want to start prepping the garden. So now is our time where we want to decide, do I want to till it, or do it like I want to do some non-till practices. So there's kind of two theories about this. I definitely recommend, if it's a first year garden, go ahead and till things. So this is a rototiller. You can either, like we have some in the tool share if you need to borrow one, or you can just use a garden hoe, or there's like 1,000 different kinds of garden hose that you can use to till. So this is great, especially to get things going, because it's going to mix your soil up really well. It's going to be nice. But like I said, especially rototiller, it can compact the bottom. So even if you're tilling, it's nice to go back with like a broad fork or a pitchfork and kind of just like break up the bottom, of what you just tilled. But it's a great way to kind of aerate and mix your soil really well. but the problem is a lot of times like you're going to be chopping up your worms and biology. You're going to be exposing weed seeds that are going to some people yeah, there's a so a lot of people don't want to do this every year. Like they may do it the first year, but then afterwards you want to gravitate more to a non-till, which is basically different versions of like using broad forks and pitchforks and kind of just kind of pulling up the soil and breaking up it a little bit and letting and kind of mixing the compost in a little bit, but it's not as invasive where you're chopping everything up as well. So either version is fine. Definitely there's pluses and minuses from both of them, and it's just kind of your style. Like I said, I would recommend starting out tilling and then kind of gravitating towards a non-till. But the non-till, a really key tool from a non-till is the broad fork. And like pitchforks are great, you can get kind of far, but if you really want to like, break up that bottom and increase your drainage, I would recommend a broad fork. And we did see a little bit of the broad fork last time, but I want to play a video about using broad forks. And we have some in our tool share too, if you need to borrow.
Hello, I'm Dave Epstein, and welcome to Growing Wisdom in Albion, Maine. We're at the Johnny Selected Seeds, one of their test gardens. This is where they test some of the plants, which will actually end up as seeds, which you can plant. And we're here in a row of lettuce, and today we're going to be talking about kind of the beginning stages of a garden where you want to get that soil beginning to work it, right? So Adam, what are we going to see today?
We're going to see the broad fork. We're going to use it to aerate the soil, loosen it up, and get the bed ready for preparation.
Great.
Okay, so what I'm holding here today is a broad fork. This is actually our 727 hard pan broad fork. We have a couple different styles. These broad forks are used for loosening and aerating the bed. It's generally the first step for bed preparation. A couple different styles. Like I said, this is the hard pan style, so it's designed for soils that are a little bit tougher, maybe more rocks, maybe more clay, anytime when you might bend a tine on our standard round tine broad forks. And I will show you how we use this. So this is how you use it. You're going to drive it in, okay? Try and get it inserted fully. And I'm going to come back to about 45 degree, and we want to see that earth start to crack right there, okay? Lean it back up, pull it out, back 6 to 8 inches, okay? Drive it in, lean it back, pull it out. Now, what I've seen some growers do, if they've got permanent raised beds, they do it like this, where they're staying out of the bed entirely, except to step on the broad fork. It's a little harder. It can be done. I don't feel a need for it myself, but it's personal preference.
As you've just seen, Adam used that broad fork to loosen the soil to prepare it for planting, but we didn't undo the entire soil structure like a traditional rototiller might do. That's correct, right?
And we didn't bring up weed seeds from below either. So it loosens it up, it gets some air in there, and really lets your plants grow well.
Best time to do that would be spring or fall?
Spring.
So spring, great time to do this. And once again, thanks for having us out here to Albion, Maine. For Growing Wisdom, I'm Dave Epstein.
All right, and that guy's from Johnny Seed Select. It's a worker co-op. I think it's in Massachusetts or somewhere up there. But if you're looking for bulk seeds, they have I think they have the best bulk seed purchase or prices. All right, so again, like broad forks and tilling, like you don't have to do all this stuff. If you have a small garden and you just have a garden hoe, that's fine. Just chop it up. If you have a large area, you might want to think about like borrowing a rototiller or a broad fork, or if you have raised beds, you won't need to do, it's nice. You do want to till your raised bed. Like raised beds do compact, even though they're not out for ground. So you do want to try, but you can use shovels and you don't have to use all this stuff, but it just makes it a lot easier, especially if you have access to it or if you have a large space. All right. So then like fertilizers and going, like I said, let's get you get the soil test back and you're missing some nutrients and you want to start, mostly like your soil, mostly soil labs will make, more like the chemical or inorganic, recommendations. And they'll tell you like, because that's the best way to treat things quickly, especially if you're doing a production farm and things like that. And a lot of these services are more geared towards like soil labs are more geared towards extension services and like production farms, and rural farms. So if they need to change their nutrient level quickly, this you want to use inorganic. But the problem with inorganic, well, there's lots of problems, especially with some of them are who are making these things, and then the other ones are like it's just it washes away really quickly. Like you use these these things and it rains and it's just going to, and a lot of times it's contaminating our water systems. That's why like the our rivers, Anacostia River and Potomac, a lot of that our pollution is from farm runoffs, and then you have high nitrogen levels in the water that's causing these algae blooms that's like killing a lot of destroying the ecosystem. So there is a definitely a drawback to environmentally speaking, and it's just like and it's a fast release, but it's great if you need a quick fix, but you have to keep on adding it, like a lot of it like all throughout the year because it washes away or is absorbed quickly, as opposed to organic fertilizers, compost and things like that. That stuff stays in it. It's a slow release, but it's nice having slow release because it's going to release on over your entire, growing season. It's going to be, it's going to build your soil structure. It's going to build your biology. It's not going to contaminate or hurt your ecosystem when done right. And it's just so much better. So I'm definitely going to recommend, doing organic, fertilizers and compost and things like that. And we'll show you, we'll be talking more about a lot of this stuff, but these are just kind of your basics. Really, I recommend, especially if you're a first-time gardener, just get some compost. Don't worry about this stuff. Like just mix in compost. Compost is amazing. We're gonna have a whole class on compost. It's like full organic matter and nutrients. It helps hold moisture and and it increases biology of your, all these different things. It even has a what we call a pH buffer zone, where if your pH is a little bit off, you like with blueberries like really acidic as soil, but so instead of acidifying the soil, I'll add a lot of compost to it, and that usually gives a buffer zone. Compost in itself is a little acidic, but it also gives this buffer zone that allows plants to kind of pull up nutrients outside of its normal ability. Compost tea is, we'll talk about compost tea. Is basically you make this tea from finished compost. A lot of people think it's like the leachate. They confuse it with leachate, like all the runoff from your compost bin, which may be great, but may be full of nasty stuff. But compost tea is finished compost that you put in the, like a pantyhose or something, stick it in water, bubble it, add some, some molasses and to feed the biology. And then you have this awesome probiotic spray that you can use, to battle funguses and stuff, or, to increase nutrient or biology in your soil. We'll be talking a lot about compost tea later. Manure, if you're going to use manure, make sure it's composted, which means it's either aged, it's been sitting in the pile for a year, or it's been through a compost system, because manure can be like really high in nitrogen. If you add too much nitrogen too quickly, you burn your plants basically. Like a lot of it has to do with the salt levels and things like that, where your plants just can't absorb water, and you can actually, you can kill your plants by adding too much nitrogen. So make sure that's composted. We'll talk more about that and like sources. Make sure you get it from a park service, like stables, like the national parks in Rock Creek or DuPont. You can usually pick that stuff up because national parks, they have policies where it's completely organic. Everything they feed their horses, everything they so it's 100% organic, as opposed to you don't other places you may be putting bad stuff in your garden. And then if you want to get fertilizers, I mean, again, don't over fertilize. You don't want to be fertilizing every day, or even like every, you can do it every week, but you just got to be careful, because again, you can be adding salts. You can be building up salts in your soil and things like that. But if you're using, what's great about organic fertilizers is a very low, nutrient levels. When you see that the NPK, when you see the three numbers, that's your macronutrients, your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and each one does different things, which we'll talk again more in another class. about that. But um, but and then there's micronutrients where it's got tons of different things. There's like dozens of different micronutrients. But I love, this is actually my favorite one. It's called Neptune's Harvest. It's a mixture of fish and seaweed. So fish is a great macronutrient, and seaweed or kelp is a great micronutrient. And this is like perfect. This is my favorite fertilizer. I'd use this for seedlings. I'll pour a little bit in a bucket and water that and fill it with water, or I'll do the same. This is a great way to or put it in a backpack sprayer on a farm. So if you want to, I wouldn't recommend fertilizing more than once a month, unless you kind of know what you're doing, you're measuring things and stuff, just because you don't want to over fertilize, especially with certain inorganic, like Miracle-Gro is very high in nitrogen. So and nitrogen builds leafy parts. So if you're feeding too much nitrogen to a tomato, your tomatoes are gonna be all leaves and no fruit. But if you do want to give your a kickstart, this is a really nice, mild, it's not very high, and I really love this. But but definitely look for the organic fertilizers if possible. And then if you want to add soil structure, if you want to add porosity and vermiculite absorbs things. And then if you ever see the styrofoam balls in your pots, that's actually volcanic glass that's heated up to the point that it's just puffs up, and that's great to add soil, to allow more drainage and things in your soil. So you can add that, to raised beds, to to seedling mixtures and things like that. But I would probably definitely wear a mask when you're dealing with these, because you can inhale, especially vermiculite. It's easy to inhale, and it's tough. And then if you want to raise or lower your pH, elemental sulfur or dolomite is kind of the inorganic way to raise it quickly. Or you can you keep on mixing coffee grounds and pine needles, that will lower your pH, or mixing eggshells and hardwood ashes, if you have a fire pit and you're not using chemicals, you can but again, you're only going to slightly it takes years and years to really significantly change the pH. So if you're not going to probably raise it more than a half a point. If but yeah, these are kind of basics ones. We're going to get into, especially with the pest and disease classes, we're going to get into all different kinds of sprays and things that we can use. But these are kind of just the starter ones. And I'm really, like I said, if you're a beginner, just do compost. Don't worry about all this stuff. But if you're looking to give your plants a little bit of jump start, you could definitely start thinking about some of these. And there's a million different types of organic, fertilizers out there. So definitely when you plant every year, you want to mix compost, as you're tilling. It's nice to kind of cover your whole garden with an inch or two of compost, and then till it all in and mix it up, or broad fork it. But then throughout the year, you can continue adding compost. It's called top dressing, where you can actually take some finished compost and you can put it around your plants, and then that's going to as it rains and stuff, it's going to slowly that nutrients are going to absorb into the soil. So it's a great way to continue adding, using compost as your fertilizer, instead of using the other sprays and stuff. And then the all-time best thing you can do for your soil is cover crop, but this is definitely more on the advanced level. It's hard to do the timing and everything with this. So don't bother with cover crops unless you're feeling up for a challenge. But cover crops are a fantastic way to protect your soil and to add nutrients to your soil. There's one summer one I know, it's called buckwheat. If you ever have if you have a break in your garden, you're planting and you're just not going to do anything with your garden in the month of July, throw some buckwheat in. It's fast growing. It will keep the weed seeds from going in there, and it's really great, to pollinate for the pollinators. But most of what cover crops are going to be your winter cover crops, and this is what's going to start building up your soils. So you can, a great one is white clover. White clover is a shorter one, and crimson and red clover is a taller one. I like to do the white clover. I like to use it actually as a living mulch, in between my aisles and things like that. But it's great. Buy these little packets of inoculants, because so clover is a nitrogen fixer, where it get like beans and peas, it sucks nitrogen from the air and deposits it into the soil. a lot. I mean, it's a symbiotic relationship, and it needs, and the soil needs to be inoculated with it. Most soil already has this kind of like bacteria, but you know, it's never hurts to kind of get buy a packet. It's like a couple dollars, you know, pour it in a watering can, and then just water your soil, and then and that will help with your nitrogen fixing. But the problem with clover is you got to plant clover kind of early in the, you know, like in like September, October. So if you're, you know, and if you're growing, a lot of your stuff will grow till November. So it's like, you know, you have to choose to rip up some of your stuff early for clover. But and then if you have really terrible soil, you can use daikon radishes, and they make a special one called tillage radish, where you can you seed them like a normal garden. We actually did this at Edgewood. We can show you where our food forest had terrible soil, and it's just like these giant, like foot long radishes that just like till the soil, and then you let them rot in there, and then you mix it all up, and it's like injection of organic matter. But really what's going to, you know, help your soil the most is like the late season, and the grasses, the winter wheat or winter rye, and that where it looks like it's grass, but what you know, you know, you grow it, and it's like it protects your soil over the winter. You definitely, you don't want exposed soil any time of the year. Even if you just going, if you're not using it, just grab a bag of mulch and throw it over. That's the easy winter solution. If you don't want to do this stuff, just grab pick up a bag of mulch and just mulch your garden so it's protected over the winter, so it doesn't, you know, erode or dry out. And but then but if you're doing this, like you plant it, like you take a hard rake, you scratch up the surface, you broadcast the seeds, you water it, and get established like normal grass. And then like a month or two before, or like a month before you're ready to grow, you like cut it down, let it you know, kind of rot, you know, dry out for a week or two, and then just like chop it up and till it in and let it just sit. Water it really well, and it'll just, it's just a, and you want to wait, give it a couple weeks before you plant in it. I have planted right away, but it's ideally to give it a couple weeks. And what's going to happen is all this amazing organic matter is just going to turn to like the most beautiful soil ever. Like this is like hands down the best thing you can do for your soil. But like I said, it's tricky, and it's hard to, yeah. So it's definitely, if you're a first year gardener or beginner gardener, I would just, like I said, just buy a bag of mulch and cover your garden. But if you're wanting to really boost your soil, cover crops are pretty fantastic. And then I think that, yeah, the bed creation. So we're going to talk about, let's see where, okay. We're going to talk about different types of beds that we're going to create, that you can create, you know, raised beds versus in-ground beds. So the in-ground beds, so it's, you know, it's definitely, you know, two options. Like raised beds are real nice. You don't have to deal with like the soil. They're more accessible and reachable, but they have upfront costs, and you have to put them together. And while in-ground beds, you can actually grow more in-ground. You can utilize the space better. You can make these long, beautiful beds that are still tall, you know, but you're able to produce a lot more in-ground. It's just a lot, it's just harder. So it's just like the trade-offs. You want to grow more, or do you want to have an easier, you know, time? Yeah. So in-ground beds, easiest way to make in-ground beds, and I'll show a video about this, but you want to buy yourself a hard rake. And basically, you know, like till the whole area, broad fork, you know, tiller, whatever, you know, garden hoe, just get, you know, chop everything up and pull out all your you know, rocks and things like that, and trash. And then you just want to use a hard rake, and you just kind of rake up these beds from one side to the other. And the idea is you want to get like 2 to 3 feet wide. And it looks like they're real fragile, but this will actually stay 2 to 3 feet wide the whole year. Like it's not going to erode, rain's not going to wash it away. And the idea is you want to build like 2 to 3 feet wide beds. 4 feet, or if you have wood walls, like a raised bed. But like if you're just doing these beds, 3 feet wide is good. And then you want to have like a foot or two, you know, typically if you don't have access issues, you know, you can have a foot, you know, bed, you know. But if you have, you know, issues, or if you have people come to your garden that has garden access issues, you may want to do 2 to 3 feet wide. And if you have people with wheelchairs coming, you definitely want to have 3 feet wide, and then you want to have turnarounds, 5 feet around turnarounds around the garden. So just if anyone's building an ADA garden, just let me know. I can send you lots of specs on that. Yeah, for most gardens, there's just going to be like a foot walkway, and then 3 feet bed, and then a foot walkway. And the idea is you want that bed to be about a foot tall. So the ideally is you want to give it 2 feet, so you want to, till a foot down and then build it up a foot tall. So that way, if you can give it, anywhere from 1 to 2 feet of space is fantastic. And then like if you're doing like you also want to do it if you're doing it on a slope, you want to find the contour lines. Like the easiest way to do that is get a string and one of these levels that you put on a string, and you can tell, you can see where it's lower, and you want to kind of build along the like a terrace if you have a really sloping garden. Because you don't want to just if you just build these beds on the slope, then when it rains it will wash down. So you want to make sure everything is leveled as much as possible, which may require you spending some time leveling the site first before you start building up these beds. All right, so I'm going to show you a video on how that actually looks.
It's the Imperfect Gardener here, working out in a cloudy day, here to show you how to rake your rows up into raised beds. Not all those wooden raised beds things. I'm talking about raised beds like this in the garden. Okay, so here's how I do it for me. That's what the garden looks like after I've tilled it with my rototiller. And then I come over here and I start on one end and I start raking the soil and rake it into a pile, okay? All the way down, start here, go all the way down, down there, raking it into pile. And then you flatten it on top and you got this big raised bed like this, okay? What it's done is it's, I could show you this part. This one's flattened out already. Down there it's not. You see how it's a big hill? That's because that's where I just raked it. And if you start on the right side of it as you're going, then you'll be standing on the part that you already took the soil out of right here. You're standing here and raking now. I already raked this dirt over to here. So now I'm raking the dirt over here that wasn't stepped on yet. Rake it up into the pile over here and just go down the row and just keep raking that up into the pile, which is really difficult to show you while I am holding this. I need to get my other camera out here, but whatever. So rake it into this pile. And then you just take your rake like so. Let's see if I can get behind it here. And take that and you just pull your rake along and flatten it out. To kind of do a little back and forth motion. Let me see if I can show you if I can get back far enough from my rake. Okay. So I'm taking the rake, pulling the dirt. It takes 2 hands really, and I'm using one right now. But you just flatten it out along until you have this flat top that you see all the way down there and on this row over here. Basically, why do I do this? Well, it's wonderful. That's why. It gives me this soil right here is raised up from the ground right here more than it would be otherwise. So now when I put my plants in here in this raised area, they've got this much more space of really nice tilled up fertile earth to grow down into. They're also raised up so if there's a lot of rain, the water is going to go down in and they're not going to get waterlogged at all. They won't be sitting in water. They're up high so they won't be sitting in water. It helps that. I've also found it helpful for my carrots, for example, because carrots need to dig down and have loose earth. So now I've got the earth I tilled originally, and then I've got earth on top of the earth I tilled. So that soil that I put on top of the soil I already tilled, now instead of just having about 4 inches for my carrot to grow, I've actually going to be about 8 inches of nice soil. Now in some areas, like this one over here, it's not as high. It's over on the edge. And the stuff I'm planting, I'm not that worried about. So having really, really deep. But my carrots, I'll put in one that's nice and high like this. This one is only up about 2 inches. This one is more 3 or 4 inches higher than the rest of the earth here. And I don't need to put a wood around it or anything to keep it from going down. The first year I did this, I thought, "Cow, if I make it this high," first year I did it, I made them all this size of the one way down here, pretty low. My brother told me to do it up a couple inches. Another year, my son made them really high like this, and I thought, that's just going to erode away with water. That's just going to all be gone. But it doesn't. It actually stays in place really nicely. You end up having the flat part on the top here, real flat. And then if you can see, it is a gradual incline that's going down right here. It's a little bit, going down. It's not like just a straight thing. It goes down at a little angle such that this doesn't erode away hardly at all. Once in a while, I'll get a spot where it starts to erode if the sprinkler hit it in the wrong way, and then I just push a little dirt back into there and it's fine. But normally not a problem at all. And so that's how I like to do it.
All right. So moving on. So let's say though, like you don't want to deal with in-ground. It looks like too much work, or like you don't have like you have bad soil or bad drainage, or you have accessibility needs, or you just want to make it easier. So that if you don't want to do build your beds like that, you can make raised beds out of like typically wood, but we'll talk about a lot of different other ways. What's great about raised beds is you can totally start your soil from scratch. You can I really recommend. I used to do 50-50 topsoil compost, but then after a year, that compost completely disappears, and then all of a sudden your beds are half full. And so I definitely recommend filling the beds up most of the way with topsoil, and then adding a couple bags of compost, and then tilling it all up and mixing it. That tends to be, if you want something that you don't have to like, fill up every year, that's a good mixture. I'd still grab a couple bags of compost every year, but it's, you don't, yeah, it stays pretty well, and it will compact that mixture. So you do want to get in there and really with a shovel or a broad fork and really kind of till it up and mix it up as best as you can every year, right before you plant. What's great with drainage, you don't have to worry about drainage, especially if you're uncompacting it and tilling it every year. So if it rains really hard, even if it like we get a tropical storm and everyone else floods, your plants are looking super healthy because you have to, you don't have to worry about it's got good drainage. And then you can pick your own soil, so you don't have to worry about contaminants. It warms up quicker in the summer, so you can actually we'll talk more about this in their class, but when you can start planting, it's not about the air temperature, it's about the soil temperature. Certain things will germinate and survive at certain soil temperatures, and because it's above the ground, you can actually plant earlier because it warms up faster, and it's just more accessible. You can make tabletop ones. We like to make ones out of 6x6s, or having edges where people can actually sit on the edge and garden, so you don't have to like break your back. And you can do all kinds of cool trellises and things like that. So typically most raised beds are 4x8. So that's basically like one of the more powerful, or one of the decent structures. If you go, at least if you're using wood and you're using like 2-inch, 1 to 2 inch logs, if you go in beyond 8 feet, it's going to start bowing. But if you want to go, like if you want to do a super long, like a 4x20 bed, you can use, concrete or blocks or things like that. But if you're using wood, you want to have at least a cross beam every 8 feet, and you don't want it more than 4 feet wide, because if it's like 5 feet wide, you won't be able to get into the middle. You can't reach. So 4 feet wide, so like, typically most people, you may have to walk around the other side, but you can get to anything in the bed when it's 4 feet wide. And it's nice when you lay it down, when you have the frame. Don't just fill it up. You can till the soil as well to get some extra, root space. And ideally, you want the raised bed to be at least a foot tall, if not, taller. And then you don't want, I really recommend against using 1-inch boards, even though they're super cheap, that they fall apart after a year or two. Definitely use at least 2-inch thick. If not, I'll show you. We actually do, like I said, do 6x6 timbers, and that lasts for like 50 years. But 2-inch thick, you'll get about 5 years out of it before you have to replace it. And we'll talk about all the different types and stuff, of wood and things. But and I also definitely recommend these corner boards. These aren't stakes. You don't have to cram it, or hit them in the ground. But it's nice if it's just like a piece of wood that you put like a 2x2, you put in the corner, and then you drill into into the raised bed, and that way it's just your raised bed is going to be so much more secure, and it's not going to bow as easy. So definitely recommend doing corner pieces for each one of those. And when you're building it together, we actually have a garden carpentry class. It hasn't, we canceled it with COVID, but we might do it this summer. And if so, we'll get, they'll have a chance to like try out all this stuff. And actually we do have our critter proofing class. We'll get into a lot of different carpentry techniques as well. Yeah, try to build it on like a sidewalk or a flat surface, or else it's going to be, it's just going to be all, messed up if you don't. But and then like here's all these different things you can do. Untreated pine, that will rot the quickest. So untreated pine, like a 2x2, you'll get about 5 years if it's 2 inches thick. You could use treated wood. So treated wood used to have arsenic and things like that. Now they use what's called MCA, micronized copper. Copper is FDA approved, but it's still like yeah, you want to be careful with the copper. It's a fungicide. It preserves the wood, but it will leach off into your soil. It won't, it's not a big deal. But if you want to be organic, it will kill some of your biology, but not, I mean, it's not going to mess up your soil. So but like I said, if you want to be 100% organic, or either don't use treated wood, or what we do a lot of times, because treated wood is a long lasting, it's the long lasting cheap option, because you can use cedar too that has natural fungicide, but it's super expensive. If you want to save some money, we get like a food grade poly plastic liner, and just staple it in, and that keeps the because it's actually the soil that kind of draws out the copper, so that you keep a barrier, so that way you don't have to worry about the copper leaching out into the soil. So that's what we do when we do pressure treated wood. And but then, like, if you want to go for like really long, long lasting beds, because like pressure treated wood, I mean, like a 2-inch pressure treated wood, maybe you might get 5 to 10 years. But if you want to get like, decades out of your beds, and you want to have a nice little seat on your edges, I definitely recommend using 4x4s or 6x6s. And our standard, what we do now, is we use 3 6x6s on top of each other. We use these awesome timber locks to put them together. It's super easy. And then you have a nice little, edge that you can sit on. This is a little short, but we'll make it 3 tall. But 3 tall is a really nice edge, where even if you have like issues, or just, I mean, if you don't have issues, it's just nice to sit, on the mobility issues. It's just nice to sit on the edge, and where you can garden. And then cedar is amazing. If you can afford it, it will last a really long time. It's probably just as long as like the pressure treated, but you don't, it's all organic. You don't have to worry about like the copper and all that stuff. So those are your wood options. So I wrote this out. I'm not going to dive into this. This is a lot of words and a lot of numbers. This is more about like, you should, if you want to try, if you want to try to figure out the economics of things, this is a great, area, or a great, some facts. I'll give you a heads up though. All these numbers are pre-pandemic. If you've been paying attention to lumber prices in the last 2 years, you may want to, I wouldn't say double it, but these prices, but it's definitely going to be a lot more expensive. But I wrote out a whole bunch of numbers. Like if you're using like if you're making a 4x8 bed from 2-inch boards, from kiln dried, pressure treated cedar, or if you're making like out 4x4s or 6x6s cedar, and the hardware that goes into it, the soil, like to fill up a 4x8 raised bed that's a foot tall, you need like 32 cubic feet. So that's, it's great if you could buy it by bulk, but then you have a delivery fee. So you gotta, if you can throw in on your neighbors, it's not so bad. But most of you are probably going to be filling up with, and that's what people don't calculate, is the bags of soil. Like you need like 40 or so bags of soil to fill up a raised bed, and that can get kind of pricey. But all together, like all this stuff, put together, you're looking at, depending on your options, like if you want like a cheap bed that's only going to last a couple of years, or you want like a really nice bed that you can sit on that's going to last 50 years, it can range from $150 to $1,000, depending on your raised bed and how much you want to invest. So it's definitely something you got to kind of calculate in. But I mean, it's if you got your money and your long-term gardener is definitely worth putting the investment in. But it's yeah, there's a lot of economics to think about, and that's why like a lot of people prefer you just growing in the ground because you don't have to worry about any of this. You just got to buy some compost and some tools, and it's much cheaper and more productive in the garden, you know. But there's, you know, plus and minuses for either one. And then you have alternative materials, like this is that plastic recycle. It's like they call it recycled lumber. It's recycled lumber made out of recycled plastic that makes lumber, and it lasts a really long time, like 50 years. It bows pretty easily. We did this in our Langdon garden, the one with 5 different raised beds, and this is probably the least favorite one, to be honest. It's still plastic. They're like, oh, I mean, they claim it's 100%, you know, it doesn't leach and it's all great, but plastic's plastic. So if you don't mind, it's a great option. It's really easy to put together, but there's other options as well. Metal is great. It's cheap, but it does warm up in the summer. So it can, which isn't bad. It just means it's going to dry out your soil quicker. So you want to water. You're going to have to water a little bit more with metal. Just finding some logs is great, you know, but that's going to only last a couple years. I love these like concrete blocks. You want to be careful though. There's like there's concrete blocks and cinder blocks. Cinder blocks is lighter because they mix in fly ash, which is like heavy metals from power plants and stuff. So it's meant for a construction material. It's meant, you know, but it's a good thing in the construction world, bad thing for in the garden world. So you make sure they're concrete blocks. You can like fill up, really like this, like doing garlic in each one of the holes, or you can like have a nice like seat. These are really nice. People really like these at Langdon Garden. So this is Langdon Garden again. You can, you know, like you want to see these in person, definitely come out and check it out. And then like critter proofing, we're gonna have a whole class on critter proofing, but if you want, if you have like, you know, groundhogs and stuff that they can actually dig underneath your plot, you can lay some, this is hardware cloth. It's like super duper chicken wire. Chicken wire, like rats can run right through chicken wire, but hardware cloth is great. You know, netting, you can do, I'm going to show you how to do these, like how to build these hoops for, and you can make low tunnels for, you know, most people use them for critter protection, or you can also, you know, if you have mammals and stuff. This is the all-time best thing for deer, is this sensor thing. It runs across and then it shoots a water spray and scares them off. Yeah, I mean, you'll shoot yourself and your pets and stuff, but like it's pretty effective. So, but yeah, like I said, we're gonna have a whole class on critter proofing. So I'm gonna kind of breeze through this, and you can actually, we've been experimenting at different gardens with building giant cages and stuff where you can actually grow tomatoes and not have to worry about things eating them. If you want to do a preservative, just make sure it's for your wood. It may add like a year or two on your wood, but just make sure it's 100% organic, that the tongue or linseed is not mixed with a chemical. And I don't know. I don't know enough about this stuff to know if it's really worth your while or not. But if you want to try it out, definitely use these two preservatives. And then like same deal with, like we talked about, slope for you know, in-ground gardens. Same deal with raised beds. If you're on a slope on the hill, don't just build that garden on the hill so it's, you know, slanted inward. You know, you want to carve into that hill or build up on the side. You want everything, use a level. All your gardens should be leveled as much as possible, and that's going to prevent erosion. If it's not leveled, your soil is just going to erode down the hill. So definitely make sure, you know, if it's not level, you know, take the time to dig out into the hill to make it level. And then again, we're gonna have a whole garden class on container gardening. I put this just in case someone watched the recording and didn't want to take the time to watch the container gardening, but I'm not going to get into this. These are all tips for container gardening. And like I said, we're going to dive real deeply into this during that we'll have a whole class on this, but just in case no one watches that class, here's some tips for container gardens. And then watering, you know, so watering, yeah, it's definitely, we're going to talk about more tips on watering in I think the third class, but definitely some themes about watering. You don't want to, you know, put your faucet on high and shoot your plants, it's going to mess up. You want very gentle, like a watering wand or a bucket or something, or a shower, option on one of these multi, sprayers. Soaker hoses that you plug in and it just slowly leaches out, drip tape, things like that. People actually, this is a technique that's been used for thousands of years, like burying like bottles and stuff with holes, or that those clay pots that where the water can slowly seep through, and with water, like if you got to go away for a couple of days, you can just fill this up and it'll slowly, water your plants. But try to water your soil, not your plants, because if you spray your plants, you're going to have more fungal issues. So try to, like, as much as possible, just to water the soil. So drip irrigation, we actually have a whole class on drip irrigation. It's not going to be this course, but if you go to this website down here, the Doug Network, there's a whole like hour-and-a-half class on drip. And I definitely, if you have a big area, I definitely recommend like drip. It's just like drip is like these pipes and that plastic pipes that go out, and they have little emitters or little holes, and you want to get like a timer, and then it turns on, and it's just like slowly waters your soil, and it's nice. You can have it come on, once a day in the summer, or every other day in the spring and the fall. There's a whole thing though. You need like backflow preventers and pressure regulators, because the water is too strong when it comes out of the spigot, so it needs to be regulated. A filter, because you don't want to dirty up your spigot. So there's a bunch of things you need. But what's great about drip irrigation is you can buy a kit. So instead of having to like figure out everything, you could just order a kit. Like Drip Works has this really great kits, or Drip Depot, and so and you're like, oh, I have a kit for a container garden. There's a kit for a farm and in the ground. So yeah, definitely. But I just got into this last year at Letter Gardens, and it's a lifesaver. Not have to worry about watering every day. It's pretty fantastic. It's a lot of upfront work to put it together though. But once you get like this system, and then it's just like kind of Legos after that. It's just connecting pieces and stuff afterwards. But we could definitely try that out at Letter Gardens when you guys come out. And then this is what we do at Letter Gardens, because we have real bad weeds and water issues. So we actually we put the drip out on our beds, and then we're gonna have a whole class. I think on class 3 we're gonna show you how to use this kind of landscape fabric. There's 2 different kinds. One that like fuses unwoven, that if you ever had trouble ripping up landscape fabric, like the weeds grow into it, that's unwoven. This one's woven. It's more plastic like, but you can we burn holes into them, and then have the drip underneath the landscape fabric, and then just plant straight in. And this is amazing, like time saver. Yeah, Franny, that is Michelle, one of our coworkers that you'll meet later. This is an amazing time saver. We don't have to weed or water. So that's how we manage a lot of these farms, because we have multiple farms. We look, so we try to do as low maintenance as possible. And you'll learn how to do all this stuff later in later classes. But most important thing is you want to not overwater. That's like definitely for house plants and containers. That's like probably you're going to kill your plants more by overwatering and underwatering, and the symptoms kind of look the same. So you're like, oh, am I underwatering? And you keep on, and then you just keep on overwatering. But idea is like you want to thoroughly water your soil. So it's a good idea to kind of water your soil, and then kind of stick your finger 2 inches or 3 inches down in the hole. And if it's still dry, you need to keep on watering. Sometimes I'll water the whole garden and go back and water it again, because I feel like the first water is like a prime, and the second one is when you really get a deep water. So it's nice to kind of do 2 passes on your garden. So try to figure out figure out how much long it takes to get a good deep watering where you could feel it, the moisture a couple inches deep. And then, sometimes like in the summer, you're going to be watering every day, sometimes twice a day when, if it's like 100 degrees. But in the spring and the fall, really it's like every other day, depending on your soil and everything. Every garden's different. You just gotta like figure it out. So, but how you can tell is you want to re-stick your finger in the soil, and if it's moist down there, like an inch or 2 down in the soil, don't water. You actually want your soil kind of like kind of not completely dry out, but mostly dry out. Because when it dries out, it actually sucks oxygen into the soil. It's like kind of like a lung. So you want to, and then when you water it, it pushes the oxygen out. So you want yeah, you want to make sure you only want to water when it's either dry or it's close to dry. But also you don't want to be careful. You want to be monitoring every day. Usually when you'll figure out your watering system within the first couple of weeks, and then that's But until then, you want to definitely check it every day, because you don't want it to be dry for too long, because then your plants are going to start wilting. But the idea is you want to try to get it water as it's like drying. So usually every day. When the spring and fall is usually every other day. But just check your soil, and if your soil is really wet, don't water it again. Yeah. And then like you can see the overwatering signs and underwatering, it's very similar. There's more like brown into like the overwatering. Another sign is if you see especially with seedlings, if you start seeing like green mold on them, that's a really good sign that you're overwatering as well. So it's about 8:30, but we really don't have that much longer. I think about another like 5 or 10 minutes. But if anyone needs to jump off now, I won't be offended. Just make sure to catch the rest of the class when we send out the recording. So garden say, so I spent a whole day going down this terrible, depressing rabbit hole of materials that we use in our garden, and unfortunately, like the water hoses are not, regulated by the Clean Watering Act. So they can say drinking water safe, but there's really nothing monitoring that. So you want to be careful with hoses. Not to say you don't need to throw out your hose. So I was watching this how like your hoses start leaching things is mainly there has to be water in your hose, and it has to be sitting in the sunlight for all day long, and then it slowly leaches the water. So a couple of things you could do, even if you have a hose that may have some heavy metals or something in it, just keep your hose in the shade, and then it's not going to leach. Plastic stuff leaches when the sunlight's on it. And then do a first flush. So when you just turn on your hose, flush out your hose for like a couple seconds outside of your garden, on your grass, and then whatever's left, then you're gonna, then you're fine. So it's not something you have to panic about, but if you're looking for a new hose, these things, I think they went out of business, unfortunately, or at least I can't find them. Gator hide was like the best. It was like it's recycled. You want polyethylene. We'll talk about in the container class. We'll talk about all the different types of plastics and the ones you want and don't want. And but polyethylene is a good one. And you want your cup. You want to be careful of the copper couplings. You want like nickel plate or something, because they may have lead in them, which again is not a huge deal, but don't throw away your hoses. But when you're looking for a new hose, try to find, make sure it's lead free, and yeah, for sure. So definitely do your research. Rubber hoses are great, except for are clean, but they're not great, because when it gets really hot, some rubbers, like you get on your hands and stuff. It's not my favorite hoses, but definitely I need to redo some more research, because I can't find this gator hide hose anymore. So, and that was like the best one I found. But definitely just keep an eye out. Except for like lead free and PVC and things, brass couplings. Beware of. You want nickel plated couplings. You want it to say lead free, and try to do polyethylene if you can. So just some things to think about. And then we already talked about like the first flush systems and stuff for collecting rainwater. All right, so last section, this is going to be a quick section. We're going to dive really deeply into garden design in another class. This is kind of like the preliminary design, like how you want to orienteer your garden, like which direction you want to face. So you definitely want, anything that's shading needs to be, or you definitely want like on a big structure, you want to be on you want to be on the south side of a big structure. So if you have a house, try to be on the south side of the house if all possible. Then you'll get your full, east, south, west sun, if possible. And then when you're planting your plants, typically you want to do like a stadium seating. Your small stuff on your south, side, bigger stuff in the middle, and then tall stuff in the back. If you have a big garden, it doesn't really matter, but if you have like a small raised bed, definitely you want to try to do stadium seeding. Unless sometimes when people grow cool weather crops like greens in the summer, which they don't like the summer, they can either bitter or they can bolt or die. But if you put a row of tomatoes on the south side and then plant lettuce on the north side, that tomatoes are going to kind of shade them a little bit, and so then you'll have a better chance of growing better lettuce, cool weather stuff. So we'll talk more about that as well, but that's the only exception to the whole stadium seeding. Think about windbreaks. I mean, wind is definitely, especially in the winter, wind is what kills most of your plants, not the cold. So it's nice to have you don't want no wind. Like you don't want like a brick wall around your garden, because you want that wind because it's good for like circulation, for the health of your plants, like fungal issues and things. But too harsh of a wind is going to beat your plants and like hurt your plants. So you want to have some kind of like windbreak, like a wattle fence. We just got into wattling. We have some wattle fences at Litter. I could show you. It's super fun building. Netting, fencing, things like that. Like a straw bale, even though it doesn't let wind through, it's short enough where the wind will go up and over. My favorite is just like planting plants around your garden, like more perennial plants like berry bushes and blueberries and things that are gonna block the wind, or stronger enough to block the wind on your annual plants that are more fragile. And then when you're actually designing your garden, there's two types of designs. You can do row gardening, or you can do this square foot gardening. So row gardening is typically what most people do. And I really recommend, you could eyeball it, but whenever I eyeball it, it's not straight. It's nice to get like a stake, measure out the distance of your row, and then have a stake with strings, and then do the other side, and then just follow the string. You can throw a level on it if you want to double check if your ground's level or not. It's great. I really love when I'm planting like these hori-horis. This is called a hori-hori. It looks like a crazy knife, but it's actually an awesome shovel knife that has a 6-inch measuring on its blade, so you can actually use it to like measure out your garden. Definitely recommend hori-horis, and then you can do these long straight rows, or you can do staggered rows. Oh, and like and labels, definitely label things. I like to label them in ink and pencil, just in case the ink runs or the pencil gets blurred. But I know my wife really loves this. She gets these plastic ones and she writes on them, which are great. But then it's like, you can't reuse them unless you get. She showed me a trick where you get a razor blade. You can shave off the top of that, sunflower, and then you keep on reusing your plastic ones. They tend to, the markers, tend to stay on the plastic better than the popsicles. They're actually like, they make bamboo ones too that are more sustainable. But like if you're doing the rows, you could do the rows like just like uniform rows, but then you get a lot of empty space. So I really like try to stagger them as possible. If you the goal of your garden is to see the least amount of soil possible, because the more exposed soil, one, you're just not taking advantage of your space. You're planting less plants, and then you're also that soil is going to just it can erode and things like that during the day, or during the summer heat. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about today is square foot gardening. So this is a really great beginner gardening technique. I really recommend this book if you want to get into it. This guy, this Australian guy, we have him in our tool share if you want to borrow it. But the idea is, for spacing, it's just an easy way to kind of understand spacing. So you divide up your garden in these foot squares, and then based on what plant you're planting, like broccoli, you can plant in a 1 foot square, even that it's kind of tight though. Or if you're doing arugula, you can do 4 in a square. Beans, carrots, like 16 in a square. And you definitely want to trellis things like I think they overestimate like tomatoes. You could do it in a 1 foot square if it's trellis. If it's not, I like to give a little bit more space for tomatoes, but it's a great way to kind of understand what the spacing needs of your garden. Like I said, I started out on square foot gardening, and it really helped me kind of understand the spacing. But after about a year or so, I felt good. I felt like it's a great tool to learn about spacing, but after that, I didn't need it. I don't do it anymore. But you could do it with like strings, wood, planks, things. There's a lot of different ways to do it. And it's just, like I said, it's just a really great way to kind of understand the whole spacing concepts. And yeah, so that's the class. So a lot of this, there's a lot of really great books. At the end, I try to show a lot further reading. We have most of these books in our tool shelf if you want to borrow them ever. Yeah, so that's our first class. I'll definitely stick around if anyone's got any Q&A questions. You can unmute yourself if you want. And then yeah, so yeah, feel free if you have any questions. If not, I'll see you all next Wednesday.